Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of our guests today brought to you by our poll sponsor, Bet99.net. Every game begins at Bet99.net. Unsigned into the Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox. Does somebody know something? Will you guys be around for the NHL playoffs? It's not a 250 number, so it's not for Victoria. So I think we're okay. All right, Canucks winning in overtime last night, 5-4 down in Arizona. Season 52 is in the books. It's over. Canucks will have the 11th best shot.
Not good.
At Connor Bedard at 3%. Joining us now to talk about all of that and more from the Athletic, Thomas Drance. Thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
Thomas Drance is also here, but we'll put the emphasis wherever we want it, Donnie. Thanks for having me, boys. Another season in the books mercifully comes to an end with Conor Garland's first career hat trick.
You might want to think about a change into the pronunciation to Thomas Drance. Little sophistication for you.
Unfortunately, it would be a little bit too in character.
Yes.
Also in character for you, last night you tweeted something out to this effect. I'm not getting the words exactly right. That it was the most Canuck result last night. Explain.
Yeah, you know what? It was almost like the 2022-2023 Canucks were called out for an encore and decided to play the hits. Okay, so we got the show of flashy skill, right? One of the best first periods this team's arguably played all season as they build up this 4-1 lead, right? There's a wonderful Pettersson play. We can see the outlines of something that might be interesting. And then we get the club blowing a 3-goal lead, right? We see bad goaltending, poor goaltending. We see dismal defensive play. And more than anything, we see a team get outworked, right? And then we see them get to overtime, and the overtime loss, getting the game to overtime itself secured the club a point, which bumped them to 11th in the NHL draft lottery. So it was like a blown lead, some offensive skill, some poor goaltending, and a result that ultimately was harmful down the stretch. Right? It was perfect for a team that could never win when it mattered and couldn't seem to lose when it didn't matter either, right? It was unreal what this team achieved. And you put it all together. I mean, I think this was one of the most, this was a hard season to endure. I feel like this was a grind of a campaign. Perhaps the most dismaying 82-point season in franchise history, right? Like, for a team to finish so mediocre in the NHL standings and yet have every single game be so arduous to experience, to have the drama around the team be so, it's such a high decibel level. It's really hard to put into context. I'm just glad it's over. Like, thank goodness.
3 goals for Conor Garland, and you could ask this about a lot of veterans on the team. He has 3 years left at $4.95. Does he come back, Thomas?
Well, that was an interesting part, I think, of Conor Garland putting such an exclamation mark on what's been a really stirring second half turnaround for him, right? Like, Conor Garland, since Rick Tockett's taken over, has seen his ice time jump a bit. He's playing top 6 ice time for this team, even though he's usually taking line rushes on the third line. He's driving play on that line that he's played most frequently with Neil Zaman and Dakota Joshua, a couple of young players who are, let's be real, a little bit limited offensively. And, I know that Conor Garland's not, like, he's often maligned in this market as, being on a poor contract or not performing that well. I don't think he's seen as like a star level contributor, but gentlemen, in his 2 Canucks seasons, right? Garland's tied with JT Miller for second among all Canucks players in 5-on-5 points.
Yeah.
Pettersson's first, and it's only by 3 points. Like, Garland has gone point for point with JT Miller at even strength. And the fact that Miller has overall more point totals, like, Garland doesn't play PP1, right? The whole thing runs through JT Miller. Like, JT Miller's an unreal artist at running the power play, but let's be real, a lot of that gap is opportunity. This for me sort of throws into relief some of what the Canucks are likely to be dealing with here, right? They can't even begin to really look ahead. Like, before Rick starts talking about Vladislav Gavrikov and Ivan Barbashev, before we start, tying the Canucks to like former Penguins, Teddy Bluger and Brian Dumoulin, like before we can even begin to talk about, this club addressing their needs at third line center or top four defense or backup goaltender, like first the club needs to do some demolition work. They need to clear some ground. They need to clear some cap space. And you look at Garland and think, okay, that might be one of the more straightforward ones to move, given that he's finished the season relatively strong. He's been, he's averaged 50 points the last 2 years. We know the winger market's deflated. We know undersized offensive wingers in particular don't necessarily garner the biggest trade demands. But, like, can you afford to buy out a player who's tied with JT Miller in 5-on-5 offense? Who's one of like 3 Canucks forwards who you'd confidently say can drive a third line if you put him there? That's not an easy decision. And then you sort of move down the list. Brock Besser's name's going to come up. We know the team and his agent, Ben Hankinson, have been trying to facilitate a deal for a while. Besser, for a down year, was still super productive offensively, right? Like, are you necessarily better getting off of Besser's deal, particularly if it's at the expense of significantly losing a trade or maybe adding a sweetener to get that done, or worse, considering a buyout? And then you get to, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and that contract's a beast. We all know it. Very difficult to trade without sweeteners. Very costly to buy out. And then you get to Myers, who's got, an inconvenient bonus late in the summer and limited no trade protection. That's a complicated one, right? So this team's options going into the offseason are pretty difficult. It's not impossible, but it's going to be a real test of this management group's dexterity, considering that they're the team with the most cap space committed for next year, and that they're not good enough now.
Well, Thomas, Rick Tocchet was asked last week, can they make the playoffs next year? He basically said that's the goal, but he also said, I don't know. We don't know the changes in the offseason, but can they get a little bit closer, or in your mind, make the playoffs next year?
Yeah, well, I think they underperformed their true talent level, Rick. So, I don't think this is an 83-point team if Thatcher Demko's healthy all season, for example, right? But I also don't think they're a 100-point team on true talent if Thatcher Demko's healthy all season. So, while the struggles in goal were pronounced and you'd expect to bounce back there remain real structural issues. Despite a brief bounce in defensive form when Rick Tocchet first took over, I also thought we saw some atrophy there over the last 10 to 15 games. This club got levels of performance out of Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson that were historic. Mm-hmm. Can they sustain that? Can they build on that? Is there enough internal improvement coming? Andrei Kuzmenko gave this team an awful lot this season between, almost 80 points, almost 40 goals. Can he sustain that given that he, shot the lights out, led the league in secondary assist rate, right? And has never produced like this at any level previously. I see some reason to expect this team to be better. Filip Hronek's going to help. Ilya Mikheyev returning from the ACL tear, maybe having a little more speed than he had after the preseason injury. That would certainly help a fair bit. But this team needs to improve, right? There's still, a 10-point gap between them and Calgary. And Calgary was 5th in the Pacific. 20-point gap almost, 17-ish point gap between them and the Seattle Kraken. Like, that's a big margin to make up. And the Kraken have $20 million in cap space and really only need a goaltender. Right? Then you look at LA, then you look at Vegas, then you look at Edmonton, then you look at the fact that there's a 33% chance between San Jose and Anaheim that Connor Bedard's coming to the Pacific and not playing for the Canucks. Mm-hmm. This doesn't get easier. This doesn't get easier, particularly for a team that once again has remained stuck in the swamp that is the NHL's mushy middle.
And quickly, Thomas, what did Akito Hiroshi show you in the 7 games that he played for the? Was it 7 games? 7 games that he ended up playing for the Canucks.
I mean, he looked good. He looked good. He's 24, right? He's turned 24 now, so he had to look good, right? When you're 24, you really have to be at an NHL level if you're going to be an NHL player. This isn't a player with sort of a development runway that we can wait for to hit. I thought he passed that test in 7 games, but as any experienced talent evaluator will tell you, when you first come into the league, you get that adrenaline rush. And the question, Rick Tocchet uses this word all the time. The question going forward is sustainability, right? Can Hiroshi sustain what he showed over 7 games, over 20 games, over 30 games, over 40 games next season? If he can, I think he can be like a helpful depth option for the Canucks on the third pair. But it's a big if. It's a big if, and we'll see what he looks like at training camp. Without question, he passed his first test at the NHL level with flying colors, though.
Think about that Thomas Drance thing, okay? And get back to us on that.
I like it.
Take the summer to think about it and then get back to us, okay?
Well, always a pleasure to join you, Dan Taylor and Rick Dollywell.
Yeah. That doesn't have the same ring as Thomas Drance. Hey, Thomas, in all seriousness, fabulous having you on every Friday. It means a lot. It means a lot to us.
Oh, yeah.
We hope the relationship continues. Drance or
Likewise.
Drance or whatever. Yeah.
Thanks, boys. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Thomas Drance.